Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin and today I'm joined by Richard Kay and Richard Kay only. Why, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you. I have a list of intriguing questions here from you, the viewers, that I am going to put to him. Now, the Daily Mail's senior editor-at-large, Richard, has devoted more than 40 years to writing about the royal family. Notably, he became close friends with Diana in the last 5 or so years of her life, and his outstanding coverage of her death in 1997 earned him the coveted title of Royal Reporter of the Year. Richard, thank you for joining us. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Now, before we get into the questions, and trust me, there are some juicy ones in there, a reminder to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's free and it is so worth it. Where else do you get world-leading experts on the royal family who give you exclusive royal news, not once, but twice a week? And that's not all. We also have a newsletter which you can sign up to. Just scan the QR code on your screen now or by clicking in the link below. Like, subscribing, it's free and it makes sure that you never miss the latest royal news because ping, there it is right in your inbox, like magic. Now, no more of this subscribing nonsense because, Richard, you'll be glad to know it's time to chat to you. First thing I want to know, as mentioned at the top of the show, you wrote about the royals for 40 years?
It must be. It's at
Goodness
least
me,
more, maybe.
And you don't look a day over, I'm not even going to say.
Yeah.
So, Breezy Gale has asked, hello from the USA, could you share the funniest interaction you've had with the royals? I love the show and look forward to it every week. Keep up the wonderful job. Thank you, Breezy. What do you think?
Well, I suppose the most abrupt encounter I had with the royals was probably with the late Prince Philip, who was always dry, should I say that, when one met him socially. And when I say socially, on royal tours, particularly abroad, the royal family will often throw a cocktail party for local dignitaries and they invite the travelling press to come along. Anyway, on one occasion, there was an event, I remember, where Philip was very much in charge and I was among a group of people being introduced to him. And they always pretend they don't know who you are, but they actually do know who you are. And,
Yeah.
and he said to me, well, who are you and what do you do? I said, well, I'm a writer. And what do you write about? I said, well, you, sir. And he went, oh, goodness. And he had my hand and just swept me along. It was a practiced shake of the hand and then push off. But, you know, there's no ill feeling. I quite understood his sentiment. I mean, he would always try and disarm the press if he could.
Do you think, though, it's more of a fun story that he did that he was actually polite and sort of like fawning of you and what you do?
Yeah, well, he was never, ever polite and fawning about what we do. It's a very interesting thing about Prince Philip. If you go back many, many years, long before I do it. So if you look, for example, at the guests who came to his stag party before he married the late Queen, most of the people on the guests of the party were journalists. His friends were journalists, but after about 20 years or so of being in this goldfish bowl, he decided that journalists were pernicious individuals. He wanted nothing to do with them, and you know he loathed us all on sight.
Although I've spoken before about the one time I met him and I was introduced as the editor of Glamour magazine, and he seemed quite impressed. He just had a little ooh. So yeah,
he did like a young woman.
I wasn't that young. Speaking of your long career, Corinne Volovsky, forgive me, asks, Richard, over the years you must have formed opinions and predictions of members in the royal family about how they would turn out, essentially. So who is it that surprised you the most and why?
Well, I suppose, I mean, the generation I've had the opportunity to study the most closely have been, you know, the William and Harry generation, because they were babies pretty much when I started, and it's been very interesting to see them develop. And I think William has been a bit of a surprise. He was a shy young man. Certainly, when his mother was still alive, she would tell me that she never really thought that William wanted the top job, as she called it. You know, the idea that he would one day wear the crown, and that she, in her mind, was sort of preparing the way for the possibility that it would be Harry who succeeded his father. And she had a little nickname for Harry. She used to call him Good King Harry, you know, some throwback to medieval days. And of course, things haven't worked out for that. And I think we're all rather grateful that they haven't, in much the same way as people often used to speculate about Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth when they were children. What if it had been the other way around? And I think the consensus is we got the right one. And I think we got the right one. We've got the right one in William as Prince of Wales.
And he seems to have sort of like grown into the role. I think we, as just as observers, we probably all agreed that he seemed a bit reticent, a bit reluctant, a bit shy, but he's really grown into it.
He's grown into it. And what I quite like about what I've seen of him, and I don't report on him every day, is that he is coming up with some quite different ways to approach royalty. I mean, I think he recognises that some of the aspects of monarchy is sort of antediluvian, doesn't resonate well with the modern public. And I think he's aware that he's going to have to make some big changes to ensure its survival.
Interesting. Well, you became friends with Diana, as we mentioned at the top of the show, during your time as a royal correspondent. Yana Riley asked, what was Princess Diana like out of the public eye?
Well, Diana had this unfortunate sort of reputation, certainly for the last few years of her life, as a young woman in permanent crisis, either in floods of tears or angry about something. And in fact, she was none of those things away from the camera. She was very funny. She did very good impressions. I think I've said that before on Palace Confidential. She did a mean queen, and she was amusing. She was remarkably well read. I mean, not in an academic sense, but she did read the newspapers. She followed political developments. She was interested in meeting people from a wide as background as possible, and she had no real concept of her own fame, of her own. Notoriety is not the right word. It really is celebrity status. I mean, she went through a period in the mid-90s when she would constantly say to me, I've had enough of England. I want to live in America because I'll disappear there. And I would say to her, with the greatest respect, you won't be able to disappear in America. She said, well, they've got so many celebrities and pop stars. And I said, yeah, but you will be the bigger and the biggest of them all. And maybe she got it, but I'm not sure that she really did. And it was a rather endearing side to her. So sometimes when we were out together, and we spent quite a bit of time together, and she would always try and not make herself too recognisable. But a 6-foot-tall princess is very recognisable, but she would wear a baseball cap, and we would do our level best to be sort of kind of ordinary when we went out for walks or went to see a movie together or something like that. But she was always recognised, and she handled it quite well. I mean, it wasn't like when she was being pursued by the paparazzi. She didn't confront people and say, "Oh, leave me alone." She was always very pleasant to them, but she really didn't have I don't think, a complete grasp of what a universal figure she had become.
I'm sorry, I am listening to you, but I just want to rewind back to the times that you used to go and see a film with Diana. What films did Diana like? What sort of things?
I remember going to see some she was very keen on Kevin Costner. I think Costner had a bit of a crush on her. I remember him writing to her and saying he wanted to do a remake of The Bodyguard, and he wanted her to play in it, and he would be her bodyguard. She thought it was great, mad, but great. So Costner, she liked.
Not
Clint.
that Dances with Wolves. Was it something like that?
No, not as Dancing with Wolves. It was another. It was a sort of mid-90s. Any kind of Costner film from that period.
Okay, so like the
Clint
Robin Hood
Eastwood.
things, Waterworld. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else?
Clint.
Okay.
Big fan of Clint. But I remember on another occasion we went to see Riverdance, which she loved.
That is, and I think so peak 90s of you both.
Peak 90s. I'm pretty sure it was at the Apollo in Hammersmith, which is still going. And I remember we had to go in after the curtain had gone up, and anyway, that was a great evening.
And did you go and meet Lord of the Dance, Michael Flatley, afterwards?
I didn't.
No. What did she say about it? Did she like it?
She loved it. She absolutely loved it. I mean, she wanted to dance it. She loved tap dancing.
Did you ever get to pick the film?
Yeah. I mean, I think I took her to see Schindler's List.
Oh God!
That was a bit of an ordeal.
Yeah.
But we would go to matinees where there would be fewer people.
And is she a salty or a sweet popcorn?
That's a very good question. She was salty.
We love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, on your friendship with Diana, Anne Carmody asked, Did Princess Diana say why she chose you, of all the reporters, to be her friend?
I don't know whether she chose me or whether it was just circumstances. I mean, from what I've managed to sort of divine at the time, and subsequently since, I'd written some pieces which were supportive of her side. It was the beginning of the 90s. The battle lines were being drawn between Charles and Diana, and people were taking sides. There was the establishment side who were very much behind the then Prince of Wales, and there were those, like many readers of my newspaper, the Daily Mail, who supported Diana, who thought that she'd been very traduced by the royal family, a very cold institution towards her, and that she was their greatest asset. I mean, there is no doubt that in commercial terms, Diana was very good business for magazines and newspapers alike. But my feeling is that I had written some sympathetic pieces, and she became slightly intrigued, and it turned out that we had a mutual friend or friends in common, and she arranged through these friends one day for me to go and meet her. I didn't know it, and it sprung a complete surprise. And these friends said, "Oh, you must come to dinner. We've got some interesting people coming. You like it?" I said, "Okay, fine." And I remember getting there, and they said, "Actually, it's only one person, and she's already there. She's in there." And with that, they opened the door and shut it behind me, and I walked into this drawing room, and there was Diana, and we were sort of left alone and sort of got on with it. And
wow,
it was, obviously I was quite surprised and
were you
slightly taken aback.
I was going to say, were you nervous, given that you knew that you'd written stuff about her?
Well, I was when I thought, oh no. At first I thought, oh, is this going to be some kind of serious takedown of what I've written? She was going to complain about stuff, but it wasn't. In fact, it was she thanked me for these pieces, and she said she was very grateful. She said you don't understand what it's like for someone in my position. And I said, well, tell me about it. And so she did, and we got along very well. But I still thought that would probably be it. I didn't know that it was going to be the start of a 5-year plus sort of thing.
It leads very nicely to a question from Kristen, who wrote to us and said, "Hello, Richard, thanks for answering questions. Was it difficult for you to write about Diana as a journalist while also being her friend?"
Well, Kristen, that's a good question. And the short answer is yes, it was difficult. But the basis of our friendship was that I was a journalist, and it was the Daily Mail journalist who wrote about the monarchy and the royals. So we had that was our entry point, if you like. What it meant I guess, was that there were times when I wrote things that she didn't like and that upset her. And I said, look, from time to time, I am going to upset you because I'm going to say things the way I see it, and it may not be the way you see it. And there were moments where she got quite cross with me. But I felt it was important for me professionally. Otherwise, I was just going to be someone taking dictation, if you like. And while she gave me a fantastic insight into the workings of the royal family and the monarchy and the people and what made them tick, I also had to sort of maintain some kind of balance, if you like. Not everyone will agree that I did, but I tried.
Are you able to share with us any particular memories of things that did annoy her?
Well, the one thing that really upset her was writing about Panorama. I was not taken into her confidence until actually I think the day before the official announcement. She told me. So by that stage, the interview was in the can. She'd done it. I knew she wanted to do it, but what I didn't know was that she'd actually done it. And then she told me, and the balloon went up basically within 24 hours. That's when she went and told the palace. That's when her estranged husband, Prince Charles, found out, and the world was extremely critical of her. And I was critical because I thought that she had possibly taken on more than she could chew, that Panorama was a very serious programme. How comfortable was she going to be? Had they tricked her? Had she been seduced into saying things she wouldn't? And she insisted that she hadn't, but nevertheless, she didn't like what I wrote about it. And she said, angrily, I remember, "You're going to be in for a big surprise because everything I say, you already know." And I remember relaying all that back to my editors here, and they're all shaking their heads and saying, "Don't be naive, Richard. this is going to sort of blow the doors off the monarchy, and in many ways, of course, it did.
On the flip side of that relationship, did it make it difficult that did your friendship with Diana make it difficult dealing with the palace in the wake of?
It very much did.
Yeah.
Not with Buckingham Palace, and at that stage, the palace, there was more of a sort of a line of control, if you like, between various royal households. But the Prince of Wales's household then was at St James's Palace, and they took a very dim view of my relationship with Diana, and I kind of got that. But I did try very hard, and I continued to go on royal tours with Prince Charles. Obviously, there would be a good deal of sarcasm about my presence, but I was reporting on the whole institution, and it seemed it would be worse if I completely ignored the Charles side of the story. But yeah, I mean, I thought they were pretty good, really, considering, but they were suspicious. Yeah.
Well, we all know, don't we, that Charles and Diana's marriage was far from ideal, as it turned out. Now, recalling their wedding day, Leanne Wilson wrote to us and asked, I was in England for her wedding and felt she was too young. Leanne says she was 21. Did you think Diana thought she was too young?
Do you know, I don't think Diana at the time thought she was too young. And it was a fairly... Yes, she was young. She was certainly, I thought she was young. And I remember covering the wedding. I wasn't the full-time royal correspondent, but I was out there watching it, reporting on it for the Mail. And I remember thinking, here's a young woman not much younger than me. What on earth is she doing? Marrying this much older man. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. He's the Prince of Wales. He's the future king. You can see what the great attraction was. But within Diana's circle, her own sisters had married when they were in their early 20s. It was quite normal for young aristocratic women to get married at that time, at that age. But I think in later years, certainly when she and I talked about it, she would admit to me that had she been, I think she said to me once, had she been about 26 and had a bit of experience, and I think what she meant by that was boyfriends, and knew a bit more about life, the marriage might have stood a great deal more chance of succeeding. And I think there was a source of regret on her part that she probably was too young when she entered into it.
How did you get into royal reporting?
Well, as I mentioned, I did cover my very, very early days on the Mail, the wedding in 1981. But then I'd gone off and done all the sort of things that young news reporters do. And I had just come back from two to 3 years based in Ireland for the Mail. And my editor thought I deserved or needed to do something completely different. And I think we'd been through two royal correspondents who'd been on the paper for a comparatively short period of time, and he wanted a bit of stability. And he said, look, how about it? And I remember feeling a bit sort of superior and sniffy, thinking, is this really something I should be doing? And he said, look, it's a great story for the Daily Mail. We'd love you to do it. And I found it intoxicating. I mean, there was so much to learn, and it was being up close with one of the great institutions in this country, but one in which the journalists who write about it don't get terribly close. So it was a huge challenge. But you can write, if you're a political writer, you get to meet the Prime Minister and leaders of political parties and MPs. But if you write about the royal family, you don't get to interview the Queen or the King as he is now, on any kind of formal basis. So you have to be quite resourceful because people want to know about these people. So you have to find a way to sort of to get under their skin and get alongside them, as we say in the business. And I was very fortunate that in Diana I found a method of getting close to the royal family.
And you became addicted to that challenge.
I certainly did. It was very addictive.
Yeah. I've got a follow-up question here from Yana Riley. We heard from her earlier in the programme. Do you think Diana would have married again?
I think Diana would have married again. Would she have married Dodi? I'm less certain now. At the time of her death, and I was put on the spot, and people often bring it up when they asked me this very question, well, you said in 1997 you thought that she might have married Dodi. And I have to say, it was possible. The reason I felt that at the time was that Dodi was the first male man friend that she had, boyfriend, whatever you want to call it, post-Charles, that she'd effectively gone public with.
Yeah.
Everyone else, and there weren't that many, by the way, Jo, there were only a few, but all of them, those relationships have been conducted below the parapet and without any admission on her part that she was seeing anyone. With Dodi, it was different. However, I think the world that Dodi inhabited was not one that Diana was going to essentially be comfortable with. And she'd had this wonderful, loving relationship with a man called Hasnat Khan, which had sort of spluttered out shortly before she met Dodi in the summer of 97. I mean, a lot of her friends think that those two might have got back together again. I'm not sure about that. But in terms of a future marriage, yes, because I think she wanted to have more children. And she was young enough to do that.
I think we can all remember, I think most people I speak to can remember where we were when we heard that Diana had died. Where were you? I was
at home, and what I remember most about it is that Diana and I had spoken on the Saturday evening from Paris. She'd rung me, one of the last calls she made, apparently, and we had this kind of routine on a Saturday. We often talked, and in those days, the newspapers were much bigger, more commercially important than perhaps they are today. Their circulations were bigger. And the Sunday papers took an enormous interest in Diana, always. And often she would ask me if I could get a sight of an early edition of a paper, which you could do in London. You could go to one of the mainline train stations and get a copy. And I remember her particularly saying, "I don't care, I'm coming home, I'm tired. It's been a long summer. I want to get back and see the boys. Perhaps she and I think we were going to have lunch and, get my life back on track." And she said, "You should get a really good night's sleep." And I said, "I will." And so I was in bed and asleep when the story was breaking. And it took a colleague from the newspaper who was dispatched to my home to hammer on the windows. They couldn't raise me on the phone. Yeah. And he woke me up, and I learned in the early hours of the morning about the tragedy.
If you don't mind me asking, what was that like for you? That's a dear friend of yours, and it's also a moment in history that you've got to report on. Where was your head?
Frankly, it was all over the place. I mean, I couldn't actually believe it. And in fact, I had to put the TV on, the radio on, switch on my phone and find countless thousands of messages. And that was when it really began to sort of sink in. But even then, I thought, it's just preposterous. I mean, I've just been talking to her. Yeah. Matter of, hours ago, we're going to have lunch on Monday. It can't be true. And then you start thinking, well, how did it happen? What happened? And you thought, a road accident? No, not someone like Diana. She was too big a figure to have such a sort of a humdrum death. But obviously I was very shaken up, but also I knew that it was probably going to be the biggest story I would be covering, that year, if not any year. And I had to sort of put on my work face, if you like, and think, well, I've got to write about this. I'm going to have to tell people about what was Diana's mood. I may have been one of the last people she spoke to. So I realized I had a responsibility to explain all that. But it was a profound sense of loss. But I think it really sank in that week when we are here in Kensington, where the newspaper has been based for many years today. And we are literally on the route to Kensington Palace, where so many people came to leave flowers. And it was you will remember it, Jo, it was a very warm late summer, and the power and the smell of the flowers which were left in Kensington Palace has remained with me ever since, because it wafted into our office building. You could smell them out on the streets. Yeah. It was a very profound moment.
Well, also looking back at that day, August 31st, 1997, is one crafty dollo who said, like many, I recall where I was when it was announced that Diana, Princess of Wales, had passed away. It truly was a shock across the world. 29 years later, this August, how has it altered the monarchy in good and or bad ways?
Well, it's altered the monarchy in the sense that, one, we're still talking about it. And there hasn't really been a year when Diana hasn't been talked about and has still continued to occupy a space in the modern royal family. Obviously, in the most significant way is her legacy is there in William and Harry. And in both ways, they embody very much the things that I and many other people will remember about Diana, although in slightly different ways. But there were more significant, there were less significant, but there were other ways in which Diana has influenced the modern royal family. I think the way that William was able to have a romance and court Kate Middleton, and her introduction to royal life was a direct consequence of how things were so badly done when Diana was in the same position as Lady Diana Spencer with Prince Charles. She has made, because of her, the royal family is a less deferential organization, because it is an organization really, or institution, than it was. We're much closer, the public get much closer to the royals now than they did in the years before Diana. And so I think in many ways she helped modernize and shape the family. And William, in particular, has learned a lot about his mother. And I think she had a huge influence on him. He was at a critical teenage time in his life when she died. And I think he has wanted to involve her, as he has said on occasions, in not just in his own life going forward, in his marriage with the engagement ring, the naming of his children and so forth, of his daughter, but in the way that he approaches royal duty.
It's fascinating, because I've known you for a few years now, and even today, sitting here talking to you, I'm learning so much. Would you ever write a book about your own experiences?
Well, that's a very good question, Jo. I think I might one day. And the reason I haven't, and I've been asked this many times, are manifold. But I do remember going back to 1997. I was inundated with extremely generous offers from publishers all around the world, asking if I'd put pen to paper. And I didn't at that time for various reasons. I thought that many of the books about Diana up until then had been a bit of a disappointment. They were often written by people who had been friendly with her, got close to her, and had decided to cash in. And I thought, I'm not trying to sound holier than thou, but I thought she deserved better. And that sort of has been my position ever since. I've seen 1,000 books about Diana come and go over the years. Some have been better than others. Maybe I will one day. I'm also aware of the fact that I'm a journalist, and my job was writing about Diana, and I feel I would be playing a bit of a trick on the readers of the Daily Mail if I suddenly came out with some blockbuster book. This is what I didn't tell you, folks. Well, I was in the disclosure business. We're in the disclosure business.
Yeah, but I think that you could still have revelations that weren't necessarily things that were considered that you were concealing. They're just like, you don't always get to write everything
true.
800 words in a newspaper article.
That's perfectly true. And I guess what I would offer and what I have is a perspective of the Diana I knew, what was going through her mind at that time, what she did, what we said. So yeah, I might get round to it one day.
Well, I think if we keep nagging him, it might actually happen. We've received a question from Joe in Southern California, who asks, knowing what you know about the British royal family, what would you advise King Charles III to stop doing and to start doing? No small questions here, are they?
These deep questions. Yeah. Good question, Joe.
Yeah.
I think the new King Charles has got a problem, and the main problem he's got is that he succeeded a much-loved monarch in Queen Elizabeth II, who had been so much part of our lives. For most of us, we had only ever known one monarch, and it had been Queen Elizabeth, and there was a great sense of loss when she died, but we knew one day she would die. there was a very good sort of tailwind for Charles coming into his role. He did all the right things at the right time. But in the last couple of years, really has been swept up by events. And the events have meant that things have not gone well for the monarchy. The monarchy is not as popular as it was in the peak days of Queen Elizabeth. What can Charles do about it? Well, he's trying, I think, his hardest. He's slightly contained by the fact that he is the age that he is the man he is. He's set in his ways. And many people see him in many respects as a holding monarch, that he's the bridge between Queen Elizabeth and the next king, i.e. William. That's a little unfair because he may be with us for very many years, but he is being buffeted by events. The Andrew story, questions about royal finance and money. We're much more questioning as a nation now about what we expect from our royal family. Can he turn things around? Yeah, I think he probably can, but I think he's going to have to act quickly. I think the monarchy needs to be much more transparent. They must stop hiding behind freedom of information questions. There's always the sense that stuff is dragged out of them. I think they need to be more open. They obviously have been blindsided by Andrew, and the public are demanding much more accountability. The king very recently is trying to get ahead of the curve. I think he really has to, because I think that's the only way the questions will stop piling in. But it's going to be really difficult for the king alone to turn it around. The monarchy he's made it much smaller now. There are fewer people for him to rely on. So a lot will inevitably pass to William when his time comes.
Well, we have another question here from Sem Perksian. Hope I pronounced that right. How will William be as king?
Well, that's a very timely question. I mean, I think William is going to take on some of his father's ideas, for example, a slimmed down monarchy, and make it even more slimmed down. What does that mean? I think we will eventually become much more like the Scandinavian and the European royal families, where they're not quite so involved in the everyday aspect of daily lives in those countries. Slightly more remote, fewer of them involved on those real set-piece occasions, but a monarchy that won't be as big and presumably not quite so expensive to run. I think the big problem that William has got, and the one which constantly I'm asked questions about, is why do the royals have all these homes? Why do they need so many homes? At a time of great financial difficulty for many people, not just in this country, but right around the world, this sort of sense of extravagance associated with the royal family is difficult, and it's bad. It's bad for their numbers. But I think William is a young man who is much more appreciative of that. And for that, I think we have to be very grateful to the Middleton family, who I think have given a terrific grasp on what matters to ordinary people.
I think that's very true. But on the other hand, my heart sinks a little bit when you talk about some, like, the Scandinavian royal families, because they don't have the profile, they don't have that international standing, and therefore that appeal that is actually quite a powerful thing for the country.
Well, that, of course, is the paradox. How do you get... I mean, William, I think, is genuinely motivated by making the monarchy fit for modern life, and that does mean a cheaper, slimmer. I get that. But also, that appeal, as you say, I mean, it is a global... It has a global appeal in a way that the Dutch, the Spanish and the Norwegians, with the best will in the world, simply do not.
And also they don't have the Commonwealth the way that the British monarchy does. If you shrink it to that proportion, does that...
Well, I think the Commonwealth, and I'm glad you brought that up, Jo, because I think that will be an issue. I mean, William has indicated that he does not automatically expect to be the head of the Commonwealth in the way that King Charles is and that Queen Elizabeth was.
So is it the end of the Commonwealth?
Well, that's a good question. It might be the end certainly for the monarchy in those countries within the Commonwealth that have the king as their head of state.
And what about, we've talked before about William's relationship with the Church of England. What do you think will happen with that?
Well, a lot has been made that William appears to be a young man with less interest in faith than that of his father, and certainly that of his mother, who we know said her prayers on her knees every night before she went to bed. And the king is fascinated by not just by the Anglican religion, but all religions.
Yeah, and spirituality.
But I will be surprised if William wants to break that link between church and state, because I think that then the monarchy might well be on a slippery slope. I mean, the monarchy matters to people in this country, and one of the reasons it matters is because we say our prayers to our monarch. When we go to church, we give thanks for the royal family. And if that is no longer going to be the case, and they're going to do less, and they're not going to be so visible, they will kind of just slip away, and eventually we'll wonder who they are and why we have them. And I think he must be aware of that.
Well, that rounds things off nicely for this question from Salmon Prudo, who asks, what do you think is the greatest existential threat faced by the royal family?
Do you know, I think the greatest threat to them is probably social media and the demands of the modern media. And it has changed so much, the landscape, in the last 10 and 20 years. People now demand instant reactions. They demand instant accountability, much more transparency. And I think an institution that has traditionally not just figuratively hidden behind palace walls, but also used traditions of we never complain, never explain, that kind of thing, will not last long. And I think William is very much aware of that and is grappling with how you modernize a monarchy and that sort of drumbeat of demand for information while also preserving some kind of privacy for themselves. I think it's a real tough act. I mean, if anyone can do it, I think he can.
Right, well, let's end things on a slightly lighter note. This is a question from me.
Okay.
Tell me, when it comes to the future of the royal family, what are you optimistic about? What is there to be hopeful for, that they have a healthy future?
I am optimistic. I think in the short term, the royal family has a very secure future, because I think already we're looking towards that next generation. And the thought of King William and Queen Catherine is something which appeals to a lot of people, not just here, but right around the world. And I think we've also come to expect that the monarchy will adjust, and that William is the man to take it forward, perhaps in a way that will secure it for future generations. Look, it's impossible to look into a crystal ball and say the monarchy will be with us for another 1,000 years. I suspect that's highly unlikely. But if we can make it somehow more relevant and important to people's lives, then I think it's got a good future ahead of it. I mean, a lot of it rests on them themselves, the individual figures within it. There is no doubt that the whole Andrew saga has done terrible damage to its reputation, but it's not beyond repair.
Richard, I could speak to you forever, but I know you've got an actual day job to get on with.
Sorry.
But will you promise me you'll come back, because I'm sure we can have a lot more questions to answer.
I'll be back.
Excellent. Well, a final reminder to please like this video and subscribe to our channel to hear more from Richard. As you know, he knows so much, and the rest of the team of our unrivaled royal experts. And don't forget to subscribe to the Palace Confidential newsletter by scanning that QR code on your screen now, or by clicking the link in the description below. It's free. What are you waiting for? Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us today. And thanks to you for watching and sending your brilliant questions. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.